switch over to, and thank you for joining the executive panel. As we switch over the executive panel, let me kind of throw down my notes. And I know you've got your notes, and we probably need a longer panel, but that's fine. You first referred, Bob, to planning and lead time, and we see that as a critical issue. Like, how many times do we hear there's a right way to do this, but we've got to open 4 years from now, and sorry, there's no time to look into that. And for example, I know Cliff Harvey at South Niagara built on that advice and got his team together pretty early. So the idea of getting together early and making sure you have lead time. The next thing I wrote down was vision. If you're not quite sure where you're going, it's very hard to keep everybody focused, and it's very hard to overcome resistance. So the idea that from way back at the beginning, Humber River had a vision of how this hospital was going to be different, how it was going to be special, what that looked like. And the suggestion I think offer from that to everybody on this call today is existing hospitals, industry players, you need a vision about what you're going to look like when we get it right, especially now around climate change. So it's going to change everything. It's going to change what you do, how you do it. If you have clarity and vision, you can overcome resistance. And that was the third thing I noted down. I think many hospitals have really had the best of intentions going into this. It's your persistence and your ability to overcome resistance that because today is, the note I wrote to myself last night, this is all about change management. And there is no more, like just the buildings sector alone is complex in the extreme. When you make buildings in the healthcare sector, man, now you've really got a complex system. And managing change, knowing that nobody wants to change, everybody wants to do things with what they've got comfortable as human nature, and it's served us well for hundreds of years. But managing change, overcoming resistance, those are key things. And again, I'd love to get thoughts from all of our executive panel in those spaces. So that, then you refer to the fact that staff are comfort, the idea that there were rewards, perhaps unexpected, with increased donations. And we believe that this transition to low carbon, the early movers will get rewarded. There'll be incentives to begin with, there'll be penalties at the end. You want to get the incentives while they're available as the transition kind of takes hold. And the fact that your staff are proud of being in a lean, green, and digital facility. These are all bonuses, right? So it's worked out. But let me, so again, Bob, thanks, and thank you for staying on to join the back and forth. I'll remind the panelists, again, the profiles on all four panelists we have here, you've seen previously. Dr. Sargent from Hamilton Health Sciences, the clinician on the team here, talking about how and why we have clinicians getting involved in this agenda. Isn't it all about energy and building systems? Dean, you are aware, is now heading facilities Alberta Health Services and brings the Alberta perspective. And Dr. Fiona Miller, welcome back. There's been so much time you've generously given to us, providing the bigger context, the worldview of where things are at. And if I may, I'd like to start with you. Those themes you just heard from Bob, if we looked at it from a national and a world view of things, and I know you're an optimist by nature, what are you seeing the big drivers of positive climate action right now? What are the trends?
Right. Well, thanks, Ian. And that was a really fabulous talk, Barb. Thank you for that. I mean, I did actually want to start with a note of sort of recognition. We all know that we're facing incredibly tough times. The pandemic has not been easy on the healthcare workforce. A colleague of mine in nursing talks about the health system falling apart as the planet falls apart. These are very real issues. It's been challenging on the environment. It's been challenging on our efforts to mobilize initiatives, but it is obviously also, as is often the case, sort of the best of times. And I think that the COP26 commitment, the feds in Canada signing on, it's clear that it's unclear exactly how they're going to do that. And in a deeply decentralized federation, going to be quite challenging, but tremendous opportunities to support the feds in thinking about how they're going to mobilize the capacity across the country to move this forward. So, I mean, when I look around the country, obviously, I think there is this explosion of capacity and engagement. So the groups like Greening Healthcare that have been in this space for a while, the Canadian Coalition on Green Healthcare, still doing terrific work. But then I think you are seeing, Vancouver Coastal, Nova Scotia Health Authority, I think here in the Toronto area, Barb Collins and other CEOs engaged in a Toronto Academic Health Science Network wide collaborative effort to push this forward. And I think of healthcare as a sort of middle power in making change, with the capacity to affect clients, patients, citizens, communities, sort of a downward mobilizing change from the bottom up, able to push upward at policy and regulation to create a more supportive policy environment, but also to actually through sort of peer-to-peer effort, whether it's in primary care, it's in acute care, it's in community-based care, actually make changes. So I think I would just echo what Barb has said in the alignment. She said you can't separate lean, green, and digital. And I think the other thing you can't separate is these efforts from quality improvement. I've seen really interesting efforts to put energy and demand management into quality improvement plans to make these kinds of facilities, they have been traditionally thought of as sort of secondary to the mission of healthcare, but I think they're being understood as part of quality improvement. Sustainability more broadly is aligned with appropriateness, as many of us choosing wisely, which is a very important campaign for thinking about appropriate care, is moving actively into the environmental sustainability space. Patient partnership, so making this better for patients and engaging patients in these conversations. Health outcomes is clearly the co-benefits of climate action are very real, making that more visible within our communities. And then I think the workforce well-being. I think we need to work on sustainability not being an added thing we are asking of an exhausted workforce, but actually part and parcel what helps to motivate them and find, address the mission that they often have in their personal lives within their professional lives. So I think these are all tremendous opportunities to move this forward.
So that supports the idea, Fiona, of the third lens that a couple of the people that we've spoken to preparing for this forum are talking about. As you say, we're beyond sustainability as the add-on. Sustainability now is the third lens. If we don't get that one right, then the others fall apart. And actually have a little notebook with quotes from you over the years, Fiona, so that the clear that it's not clear that it's unclear. I think that's one of the best ones so far. And the idea of the importance of vision and personal missions, so on in that we won't get distracted, that even though we're not quite sure about the good things that are going to happen over the coming few years, we know where we have to get to along there, so we can weigh our options, we can weigh our decisions in the context of where we're heading. And that importance of vision that Barbara, you covered so well is really important. Dean, I'm hoping you're on the line. I know you've got some emergencies happening in Alberta this morning. Are you here?
I am here. Yes, Ian.
Wonderful. Thank you. I hope things are going well there. Yeah. So in this world of the pandemic and multiple crises all happening simultaneously, and Alberta's been hit, it seems, at least as hard as anybody else. How is Alberta, and you've got a massive organization, how is Alberta Health Services responding to this additional lens to the climate crisis on top of all the other crises you're having to deal with? How's that going?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I really appreciate being here today, and I really think this is a really important conversation. Before I sort of make any comments, I want to acknowledge Steve Reese is online. He's a member of the audience here, and a lot of what I have to say, Steve has a long history of decades of Alberta and nationally as well, and so he may have some comments on this as well.
If I may, Dean, just as a heads up, Steve is now the incoming president of the International Federation. And Steve, we're hoping at the end of the afternoon session you'll be there just to give a bit of an announcement about that conference coming up. And Bob, I think you've heard, we're crossing our fingers that Humber River will be able to host an international delegation to hear the story next year. But sorry to interrupt you.
No, perfect, Steve. I was just going to give a plug for Steve for that international conference as well. So give him some airspace. For those who don't know Alberta Health Services, I just wanted to comment that we're and I know we have some international guests here today as well. We're a large consolidated health authority for the province of Alberta. So we provide healthcare, a full range of healthcare, yet we're young. We're about 11 years old. Capital asset wise, we own or lease approaching 5 million square meters of space, so 50 million square feet if you're in feet. So most of that is owned. We have over 1,200 physical buildings. Our utility expenditure this year, we're expecting to be over 130 million, $136 million. It's not a competition, but I only say those stats because we have a high incentive, to Barb's comment, to reduce our consumption and our costs, and subsequently our emissions as well. So we have a significant incentive to reduce that beyond, as Barb said, the right thing to do. We have a long history of energy management, and Ian, if I have too many comments, just shut me down and we'll.
No, you're doing fine, Dean. We've got, thanks to a lot of help, we've got time in this session. Please tell your story.
So we have a long history of energy management throughout the province, as many do across the country. We've tried many different strategies over the years, and I think that's important. There's not a one single strategy that works. I think you have to have a number of arrows in the quill to draw upon. In our early days, we used our own operating budget when we had some very low hanging fruit and return on investment projects. During the last decade, if I can speak to the AHS history, the Alberta Health Services history, we've established a corporate environmental sustainability policy, and I think that's important because that enrolls the executive and the board into this and ensures that we have their support as we go forward. We created a formal corporate office of sustainability. We now have about 16 staff in that office, including some full-time electricians that, rather than contract out, are now upgrading lighting throughout the province. We established a broad-based steering committee that includes representatives from our own capital management, from finance, nutrition, and food. We have 2 physicians on it. Clinical operations, a heavy support from clinical operations, IT, communications, environmental health, and a number of others. So it's very broad-based. And we're focusing not just on energy consumption, but on sustainability, environmental issues like food waste recycling, OR and synthetic gases, equipment recycling and such. Charter member of the City of Edmonton's Corporate Climate Leadership Challenge. So we've started trying to show leadership with the other public agencies in the province. We're corporate members of this network, Climate Challenge Network, and also the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare. In fact, the chair currently is from our team, Harry Vandermeer. Some of the energy reduction initiatives that we've tried in the last, not tried, but have in place over the last few years. We have used some of our capital maintenance renewal funding that we received from our provincial government directly to energy. We try to take advantage of those projects the best we can. If we're renewing an HVAC system because it's needed to be upgraded, we make sure that we introduce energy saving design into that, whether it's preheat systems or heat wheels or such. But we have actually then dedicated $5 million out of our full allotment. This year it changes by budget, provincial government budgets, but 5 million out of 134 million are directly energy reduction projects this year. We have had a couple of ESCO projects in the last 5 years at 2 different sites, cost of around $30 million, return on investment of 11.5 years. So we saved about 2.6 million, or will save as those projects, the construction project is done. So now we're reaping the rewards of reduced consumption, and it right through the gamut of lighting, metering, HVAC, steam traps, water, and such, and we can go into more detail if you like. We have tried to train our maintenance staff on operating buildings, particularly in the rural areas. Our large hospitals have a lot of expertise and talent and trades. We're finding that some of our rural sites need some help in terms of how to operate a building. And one of the really big best bang for buck initiatives is recommissioning of facilities and learning how to operate a facility efficiently. As we were going through some of our facilities, we actually found occasionally where the maintenance staff had turned off the building management system because it was getting in the way of operating a building. So we have helped them understand how those systems will operate a building efficiently. We have established a really large energy reduction plan of over $100 million investment required with a return on investment of 10 years. We are still looking and exploring alternate ways of being able to fund that. That's one of our challenges, is finding sufficient capital funding for this. But we are, as earlier mentioned, using some of our capital renewal funding to eat away at that, and because the return on investment is around 10 years for that project. And we are looking at a number of federal funding options for that, and also up to and including self-financing. We're looking at whether or not it would make a business case to self-finance that. Important feature is we measure our consumption. We track our emissions. We track our utility consumption by site. And that's really important. You can't, as the old adage is, you can't change what you don't measure. So that's an important feature. I might stop there, Ian. I have some other comments, but we can engage that as we go forward.
I got a couple of questions for you as well, if I may, Dean, to go beyond all the good things that you're doing. The what, I think the why is clear. As the how, that's sort of intriguing. I think AHS recently went through an Ernst & Young audit of operating efficiencies. Was there anything? So this external lens is always helpful, right? Are we doing the right things? Are we doing them in the right way? Did they have anything to say about how you were managing sustainability, utility costs, and so on?
Well, it's a push and pull. I think we get accommodations for being very successful in what we've accomplished to date, and we can just cite how much the cumulative savings we've achieved over the years. But so we get acknowledged for that, but there's still a long way to go in terms of where we need to go. I truly believe the net zero is, at some point, we're going to be directed, I believe, through legislation to achieve net zero. And so I think we need to be working towards that now, because as everyone online knows, that this is not a quick turnaround solution. It takes years, as Barb indicated, in looking at and designing the Humber River hospital. It takes years to get from start to finish, and you need to pre-plan years ahead. And hospitals, I've said before, others have heard me indicate, are in really utility pigs. We're heavy utility consumers as a building. Buildings are a major contributor, and to emissions, and within that, hospitals are some of the worst. Just to the nature, it's not a negative feature of the hospital, it's the nature of how hospitals operate. So we need to reduce that consumption, and I think we need to look at renewable energy, because we're not going to get to net zero without doing that. We won't be able to reduce our consumption to zero, of course. So we need to look at the whole picture of how to get towards that net zero target, which I think is going to be coming towards us. It won't be an elective at some point, it'll be a requirement.
That makes sense. I was also interested in your comment about maintenance staff and how involved they are. And I have to admit, first time we looked at your program, the fact that the utilities are paid centrally, as opposed to having site responsibility, we kind of scratched our head and thought that can't work. You know, if you have, and it works really, really well. You've got $5 million a year of recorded savings that are playing out there. What are your thoughts about organizing? And we've heard alignment from Fiona, we've heard alignment from Bob. What are how do you keep the organization engaged with this stuff, especially in these times when there's so many other priorities going on? How do you manage that, getting people really care about this stuff and produce results?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. You know, because we're a large organization, I think one of the features of that is we've been able to consolidate and standardize processes throughout the province. So our own organizational chart, even within capital management, is a matrix structure where we have operational accountability in the local zones, but we have centers of expertise that transcend through those operational zones. We have 5 zones in the province to maintain standards and consistency throughout the province. And the big advantage for us is that we can learn from each other. We can trial something at one hospital, and there's no barriers between hospitals to be able to trial it at another hospital somewhere else. And so we actually have been doing that. We'll start something at one hospital, does it work or not? And if it does, we'll replicate it through other hospitals throughout the province. And that's really given us some good, a good field of experimentation, if you like.
Yeah, we see you guys as world experts on heat recovery wheels. So I know, Bob, your stuff, you've got more of those than you can shake a stick at. But AHS has had so many of those for so long. They've failed. They've been wildly successful. They've been optimized. And we turn to AHS for the people on your staff that really get this stuff. They've been living with in depth for a long while. I want to come back to you a bit later around where clinicians fit in, but first, can we hear from Miles, your perspective on why you are engaging with this and what you're seeing. And Fiona, I'd like your thoughts on this, because you see so much of this activity going on. The role of clinicians in enabling, in supporting, and sometimes getting in the way of progress around sustainability. What drives you, Miles?
Thanks, Ian. Am I on screen okay there?
Yes, you are. Good.
So yeah, thanks for asking me to join today, Ian. I think there's a lot that clinicians can do. I don't think I put much about this in my introduction, so I'll just say a little bit now about it. I'm involved with a fairly young project called PEACH, or Peach Health Ontario, and it stands for Partnerships for Environmental Action by Clinicians in Hospitals and Healthcare Facilities. I think one of the things that inspired us to do this sort of a project is the fact that I've been on a number of green teams over the years and still on 3 green teams at various facilities. I think we get a lot done. And I reached out to a couple of my friends this summer. I'm a 93 graduate in medical school, so I've been around for a while. And of course, my co-graduates are now chiefs and chairs and whatnot. And these are the things that you do when you're in your 50s. And I reached out to a few of them and said, hey, what are you doing at your facility in terms of greening? And they didn't think they had a green team. They didn't think they had sustainability champions. And then after they finished saying that, they basically go on a climate rant, because I know they care. And as we know from various studies, over 50% of Canadians, and I'm not talking about healthcare here, but over 50% of Canadians are at least very concerned about climate. So to me, 2 and 2 isn't equaling 4. I mean, you have these people who are in positions of power, who care about the environment, but nothing's really happening at their facility. So I think that was a big part of the inspiration to start a project like this and to enable people to take action at their site. So the first question you asked me was why clinicians? And I would say because we have to. This is decarbonizing the healthcare system, I don't need to tell you, is a massive project. And our little PEACH group looks at it in terms of 8 categories. And some of these categories we've talked about this morning: leadership. So from my perspective, do you have a sustainability chief at your facility? Do you have a sustainability goal or a zero carbon goal? Do you have a green team? Are there project champions at various wards in the hospital? Do you have sustainability on every agenda? Education, another big topic. Are you doing QI sustainability projects? And Fiona might speak more about that, because I think that's a lot of what Cascades will be pushing. Are you a Choosing Wisely hospital? Choosing Wisely, of course, was started years ago to deal with scarce resources. And I think people now realize it's a big part of reducing resources. Then, of course, we have a topic, whether you want to call it supply chain or procurement or life cycle, which we have simplified by calling it the 4 R's, because clinicians are new to this sort of thing. The first R, of course, being refuse. We, in some cases, have the power to refuse certain products. And autoclaving used to be a big part of the hospital, taking metal instruments and cleaning them and reusing them. And now we're getting more and more into throwaway plastics. And so there's a lot to be gained there by going back to autoclaving. Gowns, of course, people know that this is an issue. Some hospitals wash their gowns and reuse them, and others use throwaway gowns. So that's part of the 4 R's, of course. Building and energy, clearly I'm not going to speak much about that. That's been well covered this morning. What role does a clinician have? I'm going to call it nudging. If we can make these sorts of things. I'm talking about retrofits here. We can't really nudge our CEO into building a new building, but we can nudge them into thinking about automation or solar panels or any other number of things. Pharmacy, as you know, is a big area with MDI inhalers, which are harmful to the environment, versus DPI inhalers. And there are ways that you can switch from one to the other. That is easier in the community than it is in hospital for certain reasons, but nonetheless, it can be done. Anesthetic gases, of course, fall under pharmacy. And there are certainly examples around Ontario of entire hospitals that have gotten rid of desflurane. Pharmacy waste is another topic, and there's a champion right now in Toronto, physician champion, who's trying to make some gains on pharmacy waste. Food, another big topic. Are you growing food on your property? Are you procuring food locally? Could you grow food on your roof? What are you doing about composting? Do you have sustainable menus in your hospital? I'm almost done here. Transportation. Are you a bike-friendly hospital? Is your bike going to get stolen? Can you get to the hospital safely on your bike? Do you have EV charging stations? And finally, natural systems, trees, pollinator gardens, rain gardens, and bioswales. Those things, arguably fall under adaptation and resilience. Hospitals, as you know, do not have gardeners anymore. I suspect from looking at pictures of hospitals in the 1880s and 1890s, there were gardeners back then. We've lost our way. How do you get trees planted and pollinator gardens planted? You need volunteering. And so that's where I'm sort of going next with this. In order to take this massive problem on, we need volunteers. And who are those volunteers going to be? They're going to be the people who work at the hospital, and they know the wards, and they know all the various problems that occur on those wards, and can think of ways that we can fix these things. And one thing I've certainly learned over the last 3 to 4 months is that, again, just speaking about Ontario here, those are most of the people I've been speaking to. There are amazing things happening all over our province, small hospitals, big hospitals, north, south, east, west. And we need to share these ideas and, get all the hospitals doing these things. I mean, we're not going to solve this problem. As you know, Ian, I don't mean to be insulting here, strictly by buildings and energy. There's a lot more to the problem. So the second question you asked me was, how can clinicians get involved? And so another thing I've done is reached out to 7 or 8 facilities managers around the province, some from big hospitals where they might be looking after 6 different facilities, and some from smaller hospitals. And I wanted to know, as our group moves forward, how can we as clinicians be helpful if we walk down the hall and knock on your door and not be obnoxious physicians in my case? And as it turns out, the facility managers rather, tell me that they welcome this type of support. They realize they can't do it all, depending on which hospital you're at. You might be a waste manager looking after 6 different hospitals. They can't do it all. Every email that comes into a vice president with the word green in it that gets filtered down to a waste manager or facilities manager, it's just too much. We do need to have project champions across the hospital. We need green teams. I would argue that a big hospital could have a garden club, could have a bike club, could have an OR green team, could have things going on again in their kitchen, in the cafeteria. There's multiple places that you can do greening in a hospital. My small hospital I work at, we have a green team. We've had it for a few years now, and there's about 10 or 12 of us. We seem to grow every month or so. We do a Zoom meeting, 40-minute Zoom meeting once a month. We seem to have paired up, and people are, find their area of passion and go off and work on it. And then we come back every month and report on how we're doing. We support each other. There's a lot that can be done. And my feeling is this needs to become normal. We need to raise the bar across the province and across the country for that matter. And if you think about the fact that in Ontario alone, there are 500,000 clinicians. That's pretty incredible. And this project that we're working on is not just hospitals, it's also long-term care facilities. And doing some basic math, most clinicians in Ontario would not just be working in outpatients, but they would have a foot in the door of either a hospital or long-term care facility. So you're talking about possibly 300,000 clinicians out there. And considering again that most Canadians are very concerned about this problem, I don't see why we don't have thousands of people helping out in this regard. So that's the end of my rant, Ian.
It's a great rant, and I think you just wrote a whole environmental plan report for anybody there. And keep in mind the recording of this whole thing will be there, because I couldn't keep up with the flood of good ideas. But let me pass this to you, Bob, if I could. But so the other thing we hear about clinicians is the other side of that coin, that you can't turn down, as I've mentioned, you can't turn down the air supply in my area on the weekend, even though I've never worked the weekend in the last 2 years. I might want to come in, and you got to keep it running. Or I came in once and it was down, and now I'm going to complain. So clinicians can, and historically have, but maybe the tide is turning, have been challenges to get things decided, get things agreed to. And Bob, given that this is going to be recorded, but nonetheless, I'd welcome your thoughts on it. Is there a green team at Humber River? Is the one needed? And is that the logical interface where the clinicians and the building staff and senior management can come together and align the interests and find those projects they can all agree on and move forward with and make those things happen?
Yep. So first of all, I would say I absolutely support green teams and the initiatives, because you're right, it doesn't stop with buildings. I would say that where you put the automation in, we spent a great deal of time educating and reminding people that you can come in, you make the phone call, or you let us know you're coming in and your area can be changed. And that's the education component of where if you do this, it is still safe. Here's how, if you come in on a Saturday, you deal with it. It does take a lot of reminding of people, educating, training new people on it, but it is totally doable. One of the design features you have to look at when you do that is to be sure that you design small enough air handling units, right? Because if you have to turn on 20 operating rooms because you need one, you've already blown your plan. And I would say we could have been even fussier about that than we were. So I do believe that it is about education, but that's where I brought the digital piece in, because you have to have the system where that can be done, where there's a one number you phone. At Humber, it's 50,000. You can't find something, you can't do something, you can't breathe, call 50,000. If you call that number, you expect and you get a response. So I think you have to do that. I'm just going to go back to a couple of points. One point Fiona talked about was sort of focusing people on this as we recover from COVID. And I do want to say that, COVID will someday be incorporated into our practice in hospitals, but it is really re-energizing people to think about these things. And I think green energy, green teams, for those of us don't have them, just like, doing the diversity and equity issues, are things we can begin to focus on as clinicians, to take our mind off the couple of years we've had and to be able to refocus on the good we can do. And I think we shouldn't lose that. And the other piece is in terms of time and saving time. We are really good in the healthcare world about writing standards and following practices in caring for human beings. It would be good if we could do more of that around the energy modeling. So what did Humber put in? What has Alberta put in? What is a heat well? What does it look like? How do you design it? But actually redesign the standards. So when people sit down and start to build their building, it's not recreating it, right? It's what's worked where. Let's get it documented. Let's get the designs out there. Let's share the information with people. And that becomes the next project starting point. And then they can build upon that. That's a piece we might be missing a bit on.
Love that idea of the digital part of Humber River. We always look at the investment in up-to-date building automation, and it starts becoming out of date as soon as it's installed, and the investment in keeping it up to date. But the concept that the digital part of your hospital is a relationship builder as well. It's how you keep everybody happy, that you're not asking people to go without, you're using the intelligence of your building automation system to adapt, to flex, to put the right things in the right place at the right time. And as everybody will see this afternoon, one of the primary differentiating factors of Humber River compared to other hospitals is the amount of scheduling that you're able to do. That will show you how the electrical valley, how nighttime electricity use goes way down below any other hospital we've seen, because you're able to turn things down. And that always is the interface with the people using the space. Dean, can we kind of pick up this theme with you? And then Fiona, I really would love your perspective on, because I know clinicians are heavily involved with the work that you're doing, but Dean, what is the clinician's role and engagement and the interface and the alignment within Alberta Health Services?
Yeah, I took Miles' comments very well. I don't think there's anything I disagreed with. And physicians and clinicians generally have a really important role. They're operating the facilities, so they need to be engaged from the recycling and use of materials and food and all of that. Without them, we wouldn't be successful. And I wanted to also sort of comment on the COVID impact, I think, too. Oh, I should say before, I mean, we have a couple of physicians, very active, environmentally active physicians on our sustainability committee, and they're very strong voice on that. So I think that reflects well on physicians in the province throughout. The impact of COVID, I wanted to comment to Ian too, because that had come up there. I think there's a push and pull impact from that. On one hand, we've been having some discussions around what impact that might have on design features of hospitals. My experience of it, as I listen to the physicians and clinicians talk about what they will need, is that a lot of our current standards meet those requirements now. I think the standards are going forward post-COVID will be less nice to have than required in terms of space and size and private rooms and private washrooms and circulation of air and all of that. And so the space is probably going to get bigger. It always has as standards go. So that generates more air, more cost, more utilities. At the same time, in Alberta, we have something like 20 to 30,000 employees working from home right now. We have a lot of empty office space at the moment. And so going post-COVID, we're going to reduce our footprint significantly in terms of office space. So we're going to be reducing our expenses that way. And our roads, I know across the country, certainly in Edmonton, Calgary, are rush hour is a different experience than it was 2 years ago. So I think we'll continue to see some vestiges of that post-COVID, assuming there is a post-COVID at some point.
I think clinicians on the sustainability committee, that's interesting. That's a statement in itself at the corporate level. Can you remind us what is the size of that sustainability committee and who else is represented there?
I'm going to say there's probably about 12 or 15 on that sustainability committee, and it's a steering committee that is accountable through to our executive. And we do have a couple of physicians, one OR surgeon, one emergency physician. So we talk about anesthetic gases. That's a common conversation we have. And we have food nutrition. We're talking often around recycling of food waste. And we have several clinical operation leaders. We have environmental health representation. We have communications. I think, Ian, you might have mentioned earlier that the communications and education of our staff, end-to-end, frontline staff to executive is important. This began years and years ago with turn your lights off when you leave your office. We've become way more mature and technically astute on that. As Barb says, her office goes dark probably if she quits moving, I suspect. And so we're a lot smarter on that, but there's a lot of opportunity still. But educating staff is really important. So communications is a big component of that committee as well.
I think that's great. And I say that's the corporate statement. At the site level, at the many, many, many individual sites you've got, has there been any progress towards the green team idea on site, where the key players at the site level get together to develop strategies and actions and make things work?
Yeah, some of those initiatives I've spoken to earlier, we are moving through the province site by site. We actually have a number of awards. An award program within capital management that we issue. One of them is Energy Savings Award. So we get nominations of hospitals and of teams and what they've done. And that's actually a well-recognized, well-sought-after award. They really appreciate getting that. So there is some, again, as a large organization, there's some element of competition. I mentioned earlier, we measure our emissions. Well, we post and we share those. And so we know which facilities are doing well and which aren't. And in my experience, usually looking at energy awards, it's not so much your base consumption, but your level of improvement. What net changes have you accomplished? So, we don't penalize teams that may be working in an old hospital with very old technology. We look at how much they've improved, and from a base level, and the frontline staff have taken that to heart. I mentioned earlier that one of the big issues we've found and really good bang for buck is that recommissioning of facilities, looking through making sure the equipment is operating, making sure that the building management system is functioning correctly, and making sure, most importantly, in my opinion, that the staff know how to operate the building efficiently so that they can watch for opportunities to either just tweak the operation or adjust or change. And they all have the opportunity to identify capital upgrade requirements and then look at those on a priority basis as well.
Yeah, and by engaging the site facility staff now, rather than 1 or 2 consultants or contractors, now you've got 1,000 people, well-informed, well-motivated out there that are making good decisions on a daily basis. That's precious. Right. That's irreplaceable. And recognition, absolutely, it's remarkable how human this whole thing is. We think it's technology and kilowatts and gigajoules and things, but at the end of the day, it's people that are making the choices that lead to the outcomes. And recognition, kind of pat on the back, plaque on the wall. And West Park actually carved out who were the most recognized of the early members of Greening Healthcare. Actually had to get a bit more wall space to hang up the plaques. Recognition is such a big deal. Fiona, can you give us your sense at the University of Toronto and all the work you're doing? What role you see clinicians playing in there? Because this feels like a big theme for next year.
Great, thank you so much, Ian. Yeah, I don't. So for some reason, I guess my face is not coming up. I think I'm the sort of anonymous voice from the void, but that's all right.
I can see you right at the bottom.
You can see me. Okay, great. Yep. Anyway, so yeah, so clearly, I think we recognize that clinician engagement is critical, and indeed, when it comes to clinical practice change, obviously, clinical leadership is the sine qua non of doing anything. I think a few points to add to what we're talking about. First is that I think we're seeing, and we need to see more interprofessional engagement. So clearly the Canadian Medical Association has got this as a strategic priority. There's quite a lot of physician leadership. The CNA is engaged. I think particularly the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions. I understand that Linda Silas, who's the president of CFNU, was really vital actually in getting Canada to sign on to COP26. She and Courtney Howard, a physician from the Northwest Territories. So we do need, we need to engage across the health professions. I think that's as we all know, but that's something we need to work on. I think the other point to make here is that I think, and I'm not a clinician, I'm a health policy person. From my perspective, it feels like there's a bit of a two solitudes thing happening, and there's clinical leadership in one space and operational leadership in another space. And what I'm seeing, and I think green teams do some of, but I don't know that they're adequate, is they start to connect the dots between the practice change and the policy and organizational change. And I think one of the things that green teams being an important issue for mobilizing volunteers, but there's always the sort of, and how do you actually stabilize this into standards, as Barb Collins says? How do you turn this into normal practice? How do you maintain existing good practice? How do you continuously improve? So the connection to operations, the connection to leadership, the working across the organization as a whole. I do think that how healthcare organizations link up practice change with organizational performance, with the overarching strategic ambition of the organization to pursue the energy savings and beyond for the whole sustainability transition that I think we're looking at. I think a final issue to flag that's very relevant to clinicians and organizations is that ultimately, if this is to be a net zero health system, which is the English National Health Service's ambition, People talk about their 2040 target, which is really about their directly controlled emissions. So their sort of scope 1, scope 2, their energy, their electricity, some of the emissions that they really control very directly, like anesthetic gases, the waste management. But they have a 2045 target, which is for everything else. And that's scope 3, that's 60 to 80% of healthcare's climate impact is in the products and services it buys. So those are bigger shifts. That is a bigger system-wide shift, and that's going to require, and I think organizations like AHS are better positioned than many of us, say in Ontario, to have a better connection across the system, hospitals to, for all of us, questions of integration with primary care, community-based care, long-term residential and home-based care, all of these things are part and parcel. So just as an example where we need clinical leadership, but we need system transformation is something like chronic disease management, something like renal care, where you really need improved prevention, improved early management, trying to delay some of the expensive, carbon-intensive, unattractive options for managing end-stage renal disease that we currently have. So a transformation in our management of kidney disease is going to require system shifts, and obviously clinical engagement, obviously organizational engagement, but at some point beyond that. So I will close by just sort of saying, Miles mentioned Cascades. Cascades is a new initiative funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada. It's led through U of T, University of British Columbia, Dalhousie University, and the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare, really to sort of be synergistic with, add to, and support, and hopefully push beyond the existing capacity, the extraordinary energy and capacity that exists. So clinical engagement is key to that, but also operations, governance, issues of governance. I'd be interested to hear more from Barb about engaging the board and issues like that, but system transformation. So those are all the sort of points I wanted to flag.
Okay, so once again, I'm running out of paper with all the good ideas that we're going to try to weave together. But let's take that open invite to Bob, the engagement of the board. What does that look like?
So first of all, the leadership team themselves have to be engaged, and we did engage some of our physicians in this planning. We had 3 physicians who we paid to be on the design team. One of who was a surgeon, internal medicine, and emerge. So 3 big key clinical areas who joined us on the design team and could bring forward those voices and go back and educate. And we did, we paid these physicians actually to be on the committee because we wanted them to commit the time and take the messages back and forth. So you can't always do that, but it was certainly helpful when you're trying to design a facility and set some new standards. We also, every project has time from the time you think about it till the time you're actually sitting down there designing it. There are years. Many of us struggle a lot in trying to get the approval and getting the documentation done, but well worthwhile the day you decide to have a project to start planning that you have it. And that's something that was a lesson learned for us. So don't waste some time. In 1999, we probably should have sat down then and started to develop our standards for what we wanted to build. So I don't think that's wasted time. If you can do that, the more time you have, the better. The one thing that we did do when we wanted to build a new hospital is we began to look at our board appointments, and we actually had a building subcommittee. So we brought together a group of experts that were builders, designers, energy people. We brought together a number of people that you wouldn't normally have on a hospital board. We called it our building committee. And that group guided us through, are we selling our current properties or aren't we? What are the approval processes we need to go through for the ministry? What are the vision elements we want in it? What expert advice can they give us? And so that committee was a subcommittee of our board of directors, independently appointed with our recommendation by the board so that they could guide that. Many of those people then became board members and were in fact the board that helped cut the ribbon that day. So it was a real, because it was going to be such a big focus, and it is for any organization, I think kind of unwittingly, but wise, we planned that. And it worked well, and those committee members were very, very helpful to us. Some of them still stay on our transformation and innovation committee, again, for that same reason, because we're looking at our long-term care home now and retrofitting and the work we're doing on our reactivation care sites that stayed open. So I think that is a good thing to do. Since those days, many of us have patient family advisory councils, And I think if you begin to look on those councils for people that have some of this skill, expertise, or commitment, because I think Miles demonstrates the commitment, right? Like you got to be really, truly committed. So I speak about doing it for saving money. A balanced budget's a pretty big thing I have to commit to as a CEO, but I think you're also looking for people on that committee, as were members of my design team, that are truly committed to the energy efficiency, to green, right? You need people like that. And if you don't have it within your design team, can you have it on your building committee? So our building committee, which reported to the board, became very well educated, came to the table with their opinions, all of which has to be managed. But we're very educated, very supportive, and would help sell to others the idea of why we were spending money on certain aspects of the building that might not have seemed a normal practice. And as you move forward to be innovators or pioneers in things, and somebody's got to better our energy model, and they will, you need those kinds of champions around and people that will help support that's going to work for you.
Excellent. When we get to the final section of this conversation, I really would like to take it into all of your respective thoughts on systemic change, because that's what we're talking about. We're going through the largest transformation, essentially, of the energy system, but also practices in the history of humankind. Like, it's never been tried before, and humanity right now is not showing its most collaborative flair that it might, but at some point we've got to get this right. But the idea that we're all in this together, that we can't, so I think back to our early days with the Green Building Council, the Green Building Movement. One of the first realizations, and it was what have we been thinking all our lives, was integrated design. That the production line of buildings, from the planner to the architect to the engineer, and you've got this much space to pop your stuff into, make it work, to the user. The bringing everybody to the table is where we got the really big steps forward around the whole development process for new buildings. So this idea that to transform the energy system, to transform the healthcare system, we need everybody at the table, because they all have a vote to play. Fiona, what are the forums that you're aware of right now where we get the parties to the table and it's leading to good things coming out? Like, when we get our heads together, we have, like integrated design, we have aha moments of what were we thinking, and then everybody agrees, and it's actually moving, changing the trajectory, moving us forward. Where are those forums right now at the, I guess initially at the national level?
Sure. I mean, that's as many of the folks here will know, the US is mobilizing its decarbonizing healthcare agenda through the National Academies of Medicine, which is a very interesting model. It's a public-private partnership with leadership from across the healthcare sector, from the Academy, from industry, and some very, very high-profile folks from quality improvement, like Don Berwick, and from the National Academy itself, of course, involved. So I think that's a really interesting model. We don't have anything quite like that in Canada as yet. I don't quite know what national conversation we can structure. We have a very different, much more decentralized federation than the US. I guess my answer to your table question will possibly not be what you were hoping for, but I will say that my sort of agenda for facilitating a national conversation on this is to actually go to and work with the organizations that, for the most part, aren't seeing this as part of their agenda. So, as under the auspices of Cascades, as I say, this national initiative for climate action and awareness in healthcare, support through continuing professional development, knowledge mobilization, as well as support to improvement projects at frontline operationally, and so on and so forth. Our advisory committee is really composed of groups like Healthcare Excellence Canada, the Health Standards Organization, Medical Association, Nurses Association, Healthcare Can, Canadian College of Health Leaders, organizations like that see this as relevant, but it's not their core mission. So I think the ultimate, again, back to this alignment issue, I think we need to start anyways by embedding this much more deeply into the normal practice of healthcare governance and get all the organizations that are thinking about excellence, that are thinking about measurement. So Canadian Institute for Health Information, hopefully as well, will be supporting our efforts, but I don't know that for sure. Standards organization, training the critical health professional groups and mobilizing them. How do we embed this into their practice? My hope is that this is where the national conversation and policy dialogue can really advance, because we don't need to be speaking to the converted. I think we need to be speaking to the less converted and engaging their missions and their capacities in this work.
That's really helpful. Within those movements that you're so involved with, Fiona, are there some aha moments so far? Are there some maybe unexpected directions, themes? I think you've touched on some of the standards training, those kind of things, but do you have a feel for where the big action may be coming from in the short term as people come together and that haven't come together before and share their ideas, share their thoughts, share their perspectives, and come up with plans?
I think we haven't talked about this here, but I'd be interested what other folks think. The biggest, not really aha, but dawning realization is the extent to which resilience is, with what's happened and is happening in British Columbia, with what's happened more on the East Coast, is the extent to which that needs to be much more actively integrated into our thinking, and not just as a facilities issue, which it is, but also as a health service and system issue. So back to that chronic disease management, how do you ensure the healthcare workforce is able to be present, patients get care? How does a patient get life-saving treatment like dialysis in the context of the flooding in British Columbia? How do people get necessary surgeries? How do we structure systems that are going to be able to deal with these shocks that are not exclusively due to the climate? I mean, we've been thinking about resilience to, in British Columbia, earthquakes for quite a while, but we've got an added frequency and intensity, I think, of these things coming forward. So that to me is a principally because I've been focused on mitigation, is something that is forcing us to think about our priorities, and obviously lining up the resilience with mitigation. I think it's possibly less present to us here. It's certainly in Southern Ontario in some ways, not that there aren't shocks, heat in particular, for us to be concerned about. But I think that is one of those lever points and priorities that I think we are increasingly grappling with.
And all about integration, that you can't deal with mitigation and resilience separately. Right. They belong together, because that's the only place. Right. Dean, picking up on that, where does resilience fit into your sustainability team at AHS?
Well, Ian, with respect, I was interested in giving an answer, but I noticed Barb had her hand up, so I just wanted to give her the floor.
I apologize. Yeah.
You're good? Okay. But I did want to tie in, I think you'll maybe speak to your question around resilience, but your last question around integration and also tying it back to your previous question around the board and involvement. I think there's a couple, Fiona mentioned around standards. That's sort of to me, a bottom-up approach is really critical, and will create that that change from that approach. I mean, if you change the standards, then the design, operation, all of that begins to change. And then from a board experience, I've got a couple of comments that I was at our board finance committee just a couple of weeks ago, asking for a really routine extension to electrical contract. It was large, so we needed their endorsement. Interestingly, and we've had a change of board members, so they're new-ish to Alberta Health Services. All of their questions were around our plans for renewable energy, which was not related to the motion request we had on the floor for them. So that was reassuring that when we do come back with some renewable options, energy options for them, that I'm going to get a warm reception. And related to that, I'm also a member of the Institute of Corporate Directors, and I can say within that society or that group, there's a lot of conversation among board directors in all industries of the importance of climate change and of the risk and accountability that boards have. So I think there's a change at the board level towards this. And if the board is interested in a topic, I'm interested in that topic. So that's sort of an overarching comment. The resiliency, I think you're maybe referring to then, is the ability of facilities to sustain climate change, is the sort of context. And I think we have quite frankly, I think we have a lot of work on that. I mean, hospitals probably have an advantage in their design to sustain all sorts of disasters, because we have to maintain. In fact, we often become the focus in a disaster where people start to arriving at our door in the middle of it. But I don't think we have designed it from a climate change perspective. We had to evacuate an entire hospital in Fort McMurray a couple of years ago due to a fire in a matter of hours. We've had to evacuate hospitals due to floods in southern Alberta in hours. And that becomes really critical to the health system in terms of being able to sustain that in the face of climate change. So I think we have room to grow in that area. Getting to your question.
This is very helpful. I want to kind of close off this amazing executive panel. I mean, I never want to do comparisons because, but this is absolutely one of the best ever conversations in terms of capturing such complicated times that we live in right now and synthesizing it down to things people can work with. And in a moment, I'll kind of share a thought about breeding healthcare. But Miles, I want to start with you and would like to take this down to the dozens of individual hospitals on this call right now as to the takeaways. So we're talking about systemic change, but it has to be narrowed down to what can we do tomorrow and next week that we can get started, and then the momentum builds. So I'll ask each of you for help in that area. What advice would you give again to the dozens of hospitals from actually across North America, not just Ontario, that are on this call today, to get started down the path if they're there? From my standpoint, picking up on all the things that have been said, I think anesthetic gas recovery has come up a couple of times. We did some, I think, really good work in 2020. White paper on the Greening Healthcare website around anesthetic gas recovery. Dean, it sounds like AHS is going down that pathway, and we need to come back to that because at that time the conclusion was it's a really good idea and almost nobody's doing it, and it keeps getting cut from the budget. It sounds like it would be a good time 2 years on to revisit that, because you're absolutely right. This is something which can be done immediately. It's a change of practice, and it requires collaboration between facilities and pharmacy and clinicians and surgeons and so on. So I'm taking that as a takeaway. That will be one of our Greening Healthcare sessions coming up next year. But Miles, can we start with you from the heart to from everything that you've seen and experienced? What would your kind of closing advice be to all the hospitals out there as to productive paths? We talk about practical pathways, productive pathways towards low emissions, sustainability, resilience.
Well, gosh, I could say a lot. I'll try to keep it short. I think the big message is that we need to support each other. And in our conversations here, there's a little bit of, the top versus the bottom, and it shouldn't be that way. I mean, we should be supporting each other. A hospital should have a culture of sustainability. And so that, Barb and I are heading in the same direction, thinking the same way. I happen to work in a small hospital, a 220-bed hospital. I've been there a long time, which is a real advantage. I know everybody in the hospital. I can walk past the VP in the hallway and we stop and chat and we can talk about these things, and I can make suggestions to her and she can ask me, as she did a few years ago, Miles, why are you planting trees at the Hamilton General and you're not planting at our hospital? And there was a reason for that, but I'm now planting trees at our hospital. So again, a culture of sustainability is what we need. And I mean, I'll go bigger than that. I will say, I'm not just talking about hospitals here. I'm talking about all public infrastructure. I'm talking about schools. I mean, why aren't we, as Canadians who are worried about this problem, why are we not in there rolling up our sleeves and working on it and doing what we can together to work on this problem? We are living in the time of COVID. We're in the fourth wave, which is sort of a double wave actually. And then there's the Omicron coming along. Very tough times, clearly for frontline workers. So in some ways, this is a tough thing to sell, but I'll just make two other points though. the point that most Canadians care about this, and in Ontario, again, 500,000 clinicians, if you had 1% of those clinicians who wanted to take this on, that's 5,000 new people. You know, so what we're trying to do through Peach is encourage the newbies. This is not rocket science. I mean, clearly part of climate change is rocket science, predicting what those curves are going to look like. Is it going to be 1.7 degrees? What does 1.7 degrees look like? You know, we're talking about implementing ideas which are already out there, already being done in other hospitals, and we just want to help support people do those things. And I would argue that this is a wellness initiative. One of the other panelists mentioned wellness. This is very much a wellness initiative. Our little green team has a lot of fun. And of course it's voluntary, right? And you know, we feel good about it. And we have made some changes, and we enjoy our little 40-minute Zoom once a month. So it's a voluntary thing. It helps you with your climate angst. And so I think the big message is for the top to support the bottom and vice versa, and create a culture of sustainability. And sorry, if I can just make one last point.
Yep.
And that's something that Fiona mentioned, which is about supply chain. And that for those who don't know, the way greenhouse gases are being measured or attributed to healthcare facilities does include the supply chain. So if you buy a box of throwaway plastic gloves, where was it made? How was it made? How was it shipped? You own all of that. And as a result, you know, you think about everything that a hospital buys, we own all of that as part of our greenhouse gases. So it's, you know, it behooves us to look for better ways to buy these things, buy them locally, find better products, don't buy the throwaway things. And I was a little surprised by Fiona's numbers. The National Health Service has a pie chart which shows the, you know, attribution of different things to your greenhouse gases, and they give supply chain 40%, I believe. And I thought that Canada was over 50%, and then Fiona was saying 60 to 80. I don't doubt it, but it's an extremely big part of your carbon.
Great. Appreciate that. And just a heads up, Bob, as a keynote, I'm going to ask you to close out. So the final word goes to you. But Dean, there's a number of your hospitals I know that are on the call today. What message would you send them on above and beyond what's already happening as part of the corporate initiatives? What can they do locally at site level to move this forward?
Well, that's a great question, Ian, and I'm almost, because I recognized a few names there from Alberta, I'd almost ask them what I can do to facilitate it, might be the question. I really wanted to, and to that end, really wanted to sort of follow up on Miles' comment around culture. I think I agree with him that you need to create that culture so that it's not seen as pushing against the wave in order to achieve the ends on this. AHS has a moniker called Healthy Albertans in Healthy Communities. And for me, always that healthy communities portion of that speaks to this directly. The physicians on our committee speak, reflecting what Miles said, that there's a direct line, not esoteric, this isn't academic, a direct line between reducing utility consumption, emissions, and pollution, and health outcomes and health status. So it's a very real to, just as Miles indicated, to our health status. And you get at that, I think, both top down and bottom up. I think getting executives to endorse that, they have to provide the leadership. But quite frankly, not every hospital has a Barb Collins. So if failing that, then it's not a barrier to working from bottom up. But we have many facility capital management people online. They have the power and the ability to create their own committees, their own initiatives, their own work. There's an endless amount of education opportunities out there, and consultants in this piece probably are a good idea to help guide in some cases. But it's all about creating that culture, just as Miles said. I totally agree.
Great. I'm going to turn now to Fiona for your closing advice to hospitals. And after that, Michael, could I ask you to take a scan and see if there are questions that relate to this area? Say most of the questions I think we'll follow up with after after the forum, but if there are questions that fit nicely in here, and then I say we'll close out this executive panel with Bob. So if Fiona, your closing ringing words.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I guess my thoughts would be first, really get a good scan on what you're already doing. I talk to hospitals that say to me, we're way behind. And then they say, but we've got the EV charging stations, and we've got this great green space initiative, and we've been doing this work over here. And they haven't and we're choosing wisely accredited hospital, and sort of bring this together under one kind of strategic kind of characterization of your vision, because I do think there's actually quite a lot more oftentimes. The other would be that I see a lot of organizations that have energy management totally disconnected from environmental services, disconnected from no connection really to procurement or finance, not able to sort of think about life cycle costing. And so I think bringing that the organizational teams a bit better connected together around a sustainability mission that connects to operations. I mean, this is clearly where AHS is doing critically important work. Leverage networks like these. And finally, I think post COP26, I think it's incredibly important that we vocally identify and recognize and celebrate the fact that now it is acknowledged that the healthcare sector is part and parcel of Canada's ambition to transition to a net zero economy. Before COP26, that was not an express and explicit part of our policy framework, and it is now. And I think there's resources and standards and regulations and policies that are going to be and need to be coming our way in recognition of the vital role that we will directly and indirectly play in this.
That's great. So get ready. Michael, any questions we want to fold in here before we give the floor to Barbara to round this out?
No, nothing at the moment that's directly related. There has been a hand up in the attendance for about 45 minutes, so it's probably getting tired by now. So if that person has a question, just use Q&A instead of putting your hand up. And I think you can continue.
Okay. Barbara, over to you.
Great, thank you. So listen, you know what, we've talked about, you can do this work in your current building, even if you built an energy efficient building, by having a sustainability committee and looking at many aspects of it. And sometimes we get wrapped up in the big things and forget the small. So I think that's a really important piece. You can do energy modeling and energy saving in new buildings as you're building them, in buildings you've already built, and in old buildings. And some of our team are actually taking some of the practices from our new building and implementing them in our old building. It's harder, it's different, but it does work, so it's important. The one piece that we did not talk about, who should be at the table, you know, the Green Building Council of Canada very much points out how hospitals are really the worst energy users. So where are our funders in this? And if you look, I think, Dean, Alberta might be a little bit better off than Ontario. But at the end of the day, really wondering where the Ministry of Health can come to the table, the Ministry of Long-Term Care, the Ministry of Education come to the table and help to support not only the green initiatives in the construction cost, but the digital component that is very, very important in order for us to be able to continue to monitor and manage these buildings. And some of the data you show this afternoon that shows where our energy goes to at night only occurs because you have the digital. Hospitals in Ontario, and I think in other parts of Canada, pay for that themselves. So it's important for us to bring the ministry to the table to help. In terms of what I would say is commit to the plan, look at it as a healing and a healthy way to move forward from COVID. We have to go back in healthcare to be thinking about things other than COVID. So let's use sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusivity as ways of moving forward beyond COVID. Commit early to the issues. Be sure your senior team is committed, and I think most people will be. Be sure your planners are. I think we should generously share our practices. So we could tend to be quite competitive in hospitals. You ever noticed that? We can be quite competitive among provinces. Have you ever noticed that? So let's stop doing that and share. And there are some people, Kurt is on the phone, some of the people that helped design the Humber building. Let's share those designs. Let's share some of that information with each other. I know it changes the competitive edge, but it moves us forward as a province and a community. And I think we should do that. I would say that monitoring is the key component. Keeping it up is very important. And even if you're not a DBFM, consider incentivizing your team that can make a business case for saving that energy, because you need to have people that stay long-term committed to it. And I think, we'll incentivize the service provider in the P3 model. Let's incentivize our own staff to do this kind of stuff and to continue to monitor the systems once you've developed them. And I think that is probably some of the final comments I would have.